Hey everyone. In this week's episode, Brittni and I are talking all about the lymphatic system, which is a timely topic for this time of year, kapha season, when we can all be a bit more prone to feelings of heaviness or lymphatic stagnation. So, in this conversation, we explore the important role of the lymphatic system in supporting so many aspects of our health and our longevity. And we offer some really simple, low lift tips for how we can support our lymphatic health. So, as always, thanks so much for being here, and we hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Ayurveda for Women's Health podcast, where we simplify ancient Ayurvedic wisdom into practical guidance for everyday life. Between the overwhelming wellness trends, quick fixes, and conflicting health advice out there, we return to a science that has been around for thousands of years. I'm Rita, an Ayurvedic health counselor.
And I'm Brittni, an Ayurveda practitioner. In a world that disconnects us from our bodies, we are here to guide you back. Through body literacy, practical tools, and time-tested science, we will help you step boldly into a more empowered, aligned version of yourself. So let's dive in. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Views expressed do not represent our employers. Hi, Rita.
Hey, Brittni. How's it going?
It's good. Yeah. Back for more.
Yeah, it's actually been a couple weeks since you and I have recorded one of these, so I was really excited today to jump back on and chat about some exciting topics.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I saw a friend earlier this week and they said that we're releasing so many episodes they can't keep up. So, I felt like I was encouraging that there's a lot of great episodes already out there.
I actually had a friend tell me that she felt like we needed to have a book club around the podcast because the episodes can go deep. And I know we've talked about bringing in some shorter, lighter ones to mix it up, but I don't know that this will be one of those because today we're going to be talking about the lymphatic system. And there's a lot to that.
Yeah, there really is. I really became fascinated with the lymphatic system when I first learned about it several years ago. And it has become just like such a fascinating place to look at the body physically and also Ayurvedically. I think we'll talk about kind of the practicality and like the hard stuff of like this is what it is and this is its function and this is what it does. But then there's also this really beautiful way of understanding that function and the anatomy of it, how it relates to nature and to the rest of our body and to how we feel in our body. And it's such a fascinating system that I'm really happy to share about and really excited to share about. And I've found it has come to be like the second area I look, or maybe third. I'd say it's like I look at like digestion, lymphatic system, and menstrual cycle. And I feel like those three areas, if you're taking note and have awareness and observing and are curious about what's going on, I think you can really start to have a good sense of what's working, what's not working, what's feeling good, maybe where there's something that's blocked. Like, I think these are the three areas that can give us a lot of information. And if you are having symptoms, can find relief fairly quickly through addressing them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's such a foundational part of our health, so many levels, and we'll get into the details of all of that. But I agree with you in terms of having it be one of the first areas that we can look at, and that it's an area that Ayurveda offers a whole lot of tools. And I think we see that whenever we're talking about the first couple of tissues in Ayurvedic physiology, we can create change in them a little bit easier than some of the deeper tissues. So yeah, there's just so many things that we can do when we are experiencing lymphatic stagnation. But I think it's also something of recognizing what lymphatic stagnation actually is, and that's what we can dive into. So do you want to maybe kick us off and dive in a little bit more or just really introduce the topic?
Yeah. So So the lymphatic system is this like network of channels that exist all throughout your body, right? And so if you Googled image of the lymphatic system, it will pop up and you'll see it almost looks like it's veins, right? It's this network of channels running through the body. And it's made up of organs and vessels and tissues, and they're all working together to create this drainage system in the body. So there is this aspect of cleaning out waste and being able to move that out of the body through other channels. So it is working in sync with other systems in the body as well, right? We'll talk about it, but it works with the circulatory and the blood system and the digestive system. So it's not an isolated system. Like the whole body is not isolated, right, in these channels. And this is such a great example of how these different systems work together to allow the body to function in a healthy, supportive way. So, with the lymphatic system, we're thinking it's this drainage system in the body that's moving out waste. It's like cleaning this fluid to maintain immunity, right? To maintain health in the body, to move toxins that shouldn't be there anymore, right? It's the body's ability to detox itself. It also is this way of managing fluid in the body. So the lymph itself is this watery fluid, this liquid that's in the body, but because it's a drainage system, it allows any excess fluid to be moved out. And we'll talk about some of the imbalances that you can see right when there is excess fluid is a very common sign that there's the lymph needs support. So we're thinking about drainage, we're thinking about cleaning, and we're thinking about balancing fluids to create this homeostasis. And so anatomically, if we have this system running throughout our whole body, these like lymph channels, we also have these lymph nodes. And you might be familiar, right? Like if you have a cold or something, or you're getting sick, it's very common to feel some swollen lymph nodes, right, on your like throat or on your neck. I think that's something that maybe I learned as a kid, like, oh, do you have swollen lymph nodes? Like, oh, you're coming down with something. But if we think about it, like these lymph nodes exist in these kind of pockets of accumulation in the body. So we're thinking about where joints are meeting themselves. So the armpits are one, the head, neck, and throat area, like on the collarbone area, is a big one where these lymph nodes are. And then also the biggest area where the lymph nodes are, 70% of it exists in the abdomen. And so we have this pelvic region. If you think about where the thigh is meeting the middle of the body, lymph nodes exist at that junction. And also within the gut itself, we're looking at the abdomen and the intestines. So there is a close connection that we'll talk about, especially with it being that drainage system, of why it exists in these areas. I guess it's like a very high level overview. I don't know, is there anything you want to add, Rita, before I go any further?
I was going to maybe bring in the Ayurvedic perspective on that in some of the language that we use in Ayurveda to understand the lymph system. The So in Ayurvedic physiology, we have 7 layers of tissues, and the first layer of tissue is what's known as rasa. And rasa is, well, it's a word that can be translated to mean a few things, but in terms of physiology, we're essentially talking about the rasa as the lymph fluid that you just described, as well as the plasma aspect of the blood. And what I find really interesting is there's a Sanskrit word, rasayana, which is essentially the branch of Ayurveda that studies longevity. So there's like rasayana herbs that are herbs that support longevity, and rasayana practices to support our longevity. And so when we think about rasa as the root of that word rasayana, it really, to me, just exemplifies that lymph and the health of our lymph is really foundational for our longevity. And it makes sense when you think about those functions that you described in terms of taking out the waste. Like if we're not able to take out the waste in the body, the cellular debris, the pathogens, et cetera, then we're going to end up with stagnation and whole other types of issues. And it's not just about removing the waste, it's also the way that nutrition can get delivered to our tissues. So if you think about the digestive process, what happens when we break down our food is that our food gets broken down into what in Ayurveda we call ahara rasa, which is essentially this nutritive liquid that's left over after we break down our food. Our digestion episode goes into that a little deeper. But that ahara rasa, that nutritive liquid, then gets delivered around to the different tissues, those 7 different layers of tissues. And a big part of that is that the rasa, the lymph fluid and these channels are helping to deliver some of that nutrition to the other organs. So when we have stagnation in these channels, it can cause a lot of problems. And I've also heard the word rasa translated as the river of life, or talked about as the river of life. And I really like that example. And if some of this language feels new or overwhelming, I always love to bring, the anatomy back to nature and thinking of this. That's what your rasa, your lymph channels are. It's these rivers throughout your body. And if we are having stagnation in a river, we know what happens, right? Like a river gets clogged up and things aren't flowing, then we can see bacteria forming and have some issues there. So essentially, I think a simple way to talk about lymph is that we need to keep the rivers flowing so that the waste is getting removed, that the nutrition is getting delivered, and that we are just supporting so many different aspects of our health when those two things are happening.
Yeah, that's beautiful description. And yeah, I love that connection there to nature and the visual too, right? Like we can see what happens when a river is getting clogged or stuck or and what's going on. And there's, nature will continue, right? Because that's what nature does. It's not just going to stop everything, but those bacteria accumulates and that junk accumulates. And then yeah, like this, the lymph, you can understand it too. It's like if you're already clogged up and you keep adding to it, it's just adding to this clogged drain,
Mm.
right? So, yeah, making sure channels are clear, those channels of elimination, like your digestion, because it is related to where the lymph can drain to and like where the lymph can move those toxins out of the body. We'll talk about some of the imbalances, but that can be one place that I guess it highlights why we always start with digestion because it allows these other functions to operate. And we'll talk more about it too, but even the skin is very closely related to what's going on with the lymph as well. And this skin is, if we think about the pores on our skin, that is a channel for elimination, right? And so sweating is one way of helping to balance fluids in the body. So it is connected to how the lymph is working as well. So when we're thinking about the lymph, we're thinking that there's more of that kapha type of tissue where it's that watery, it's that juiciness, it's can easily accumulate, right? Because we think of kapha as being easily accumulate, but we have to move it. And we know that kapha, if you've been listening to our episodes, you know that kapha can be very stubborn and very stuck. And if we aren't proactively moving kapha, it's just going to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. And we need to get things moving. And we'll talk about that in some of the practices and the herbs and like the ways to do that. But that becomes another way that we can look at the tissue and how to support that tissue by understanding the qualities that it has.
What I was thinking as you were describing that, that's an important call out when we're talking about lymph, is that it doesn't have a pump. When we think about our circulatory system in our blood, it's pumped, of course, by the heart. Our lymph doesn't have a pump in that same way. And so we've talked about this a little bit in the kapha episode, but it's important that we're finding different ways, and we'll talk about the different ways that we can move our lymph. One being exercise, and another one being diaphragmatic breathing. And the diaphragm, which is this muscle that sits at the base of our lungs, when we are engaging our diaphragm as we're breathing, that is a really powerful way that lymph can flow in the body. And there's 2 ways that that happens. One is that when we're engaging the diaphragm, it essentially creates a pressure buildup and release in the body. And then also when we're engaging that diaphragm, as you mentioned, there's so many lymph nodes in that area that it can just really gently kind of massage or squeeze some of those lymph nodes or press against some of the lymph nodes, and that can help to support some fluid movement as well. And it's really interesting. I was reading a study recently that was talking about how even in athletes, I think it was like 91% of athletes were not fully engaging their diaphragm. And these are people, of course, who have really good cardiovascular strength and ability. And so it's really, really common that we don't engage our diaphragm with breathing. And so bringing in some breathing exercises regularly to support diaphragmatic breathing is really connected to lymph. I think often we're talking about diaphragmatic breathing in the sense of the nervous system and how it can be supportive in that sense, but it's also really supportive for our lymphatic system.
Yeah, and you can I mean, you can feel it too if you try it and if you're just taking shallow breaths, right? If you're only breathing to your chest, but you're not breathing to the diaphragm, the lower rib area, that like deeper in the body, you can think about it as, you're not fully draining your body. You're not fully detoxing your body and supporting that natural detoxification to happen. And it is really fascinating to think that like it sounds I I think just as a simple statement where it's like, "Oh, breathing helps you detox your body." It's like, "Well, wait a second, let me think about that." But if you look at anatomically look at the body and see the connection between these channels and these functions and these systems, breathing does create this change in the body, right? And it creates that movement. And we have the muscle to do that, which is really fascinating. So it is a really important distinction with this system, just like you're saying, Rita, as opposed to the circulatory system, we have that heart. Our heart is pumping that blood and moving it through the veins. The lymph system, we are proactively having to do that. And there's numerous ways you can do that, but breathing is one of them. And even you'll find it in Western medicine recommendations, diaphragmatic breathing, which is so fascinating. So yeah, it's such an interesting part of this. I find that connection
Mm,
to the breath, right? And the connection to prana and life
mm,
force. And even just, yeah, I guess maybe going further into the Ayurvedic perspective where we're looking at rasa and rasayana as this, this ability to support the body with longevity and longevity of health. Well, prana is very much involved in that, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit more with foods that are supportive for lymph flow, but if we think about even if we think about plants and like what do plants need, right? Well, plants need oxygen to survive, right? And they need water and they need soil and they need sunlight. And like we're the same way, right? And so when we have prana, we want it to also have movement. And that movement is what brings oxygen and nutrients to these other areas of the body. And it detoxes as well, right? If we think about what we exhale, maybe I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but I think it's like
no,
so
it's a fascinating
fascinating to
rabbit
think
hole.
of
Yeah.
like this
Yeah.
connection that it's, yeah, we're talking about lymph, but we're talking about
Yeah.
breathing. And we're talking about how I think the lesson here for me, maybe this is the point, is that we don't need a tool. We don't need a thing. We don't need a gadget. Our body is so capable to be that medicine with exactly what we have in ourselves right now. Like just what we have, like in this very moment. We don't need to go and like get something to make
Mm,
ourselves better. And I think that breathing is just such an underutilized tool in that way that we're not really taught to like slow down and connect to our breath. And I think we are just kind of trained to like, oh well yeah, I breathe all the time. I have to breathe. My body knows to breathe. But when we're intentionally breathing, we are engaging different systems in the body. And maybe that's the point here and the connection to the lymphatic system.
yeah, no, I agree with you that it's a very fascinating rabbit hole. And I'm glad you brought us down it because I think that we've just been really taught to compartmentalize the body so much. And so to really just hone in and say out loud again that breathing deeply, breathing with the diaphragm engaged is a way to support moving out more waste from our body, right? Breathing more deeply is a way to help support nutrition delivery throughout our body. And there's hormones that are moved throughout the lymph as well. Our fat soluble hormones, testosterone, cortisol, and estrogen are also moved throughout the lymph. So, again, to your point of how often we immediately go to needing gadgets or supplements or tools, that's a good place to pause and just check in. And I think to make it practical, because I think so many of us could be listening to this and thinking like, oh yeah, I should be breathing more, but I always forget to do that. I really like to have people tie it to a certain part of your routine. So for me, I practice diaphragmatic breathing often when I'm driving and before I go to bed and first thing in the morning. Those are my 3 times. Or I'll have people tie it to maybe, if you're walking down the hall between meetings or between clients, or you're walking to your punch clock, or picking something specific in your routine that you can connect engaging your diaphragm to is an easier way, I think, to get that in. Maybe while you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah, maybe do it. Yeah, do it now. Even as we're talking about it, I'm like, well, where's the breath in my body? And I think that's important because it really highlights that we don't need to like wait for the perfect moment to have 15 minutes to sit down and do my breathing exercise. It's like, well, you have 1 minute right now as you're driving or as you're, you know, whatever it is. So I think that's like a really important reminder and a reframe, right, of how these tools are accessible. It doesn't have like everyone's busy, everyone has a million things going on, but we can incorporate them in these ways.
Well, and let's maybe talk about the signs of imbalance in the lymph system too, because I think it's something. Like, we talk often about how everything in the body is in flux, and I think that's a good thing to keep in mind when we're talking about lymph. It's something where, there's gonna be certain times of the year or certain events in life that you're just gonna be a little bit more predisposed to having some lymph stagnation, and how we can know that that's happening is that we can experience things like, well, you mentioned swelling. Swelling or edema can be a bigger sign of some lymph inefficiency and stagnation. More generally, we can see things like fatigue and brain fog. We can experience a lot of skin imbalances when there's some issues with lymph, congestion, weight gain, specifically weight gain around that region you mentioned, that like lower abdominal, kind of upper thigh region can be a common place that we can experience that stagnation. And we can also look at it from a hormonal perspective as well, because, like we mentioned, the lymph is a channel of transportation for hormones. And so sometimes when we're seeing specific hormonal imbalances, it really comes down to, well, how is the transportation system in the body, and looking at it that way.
Yeah, I kind of want to dive into a couple of these just to explain them like a little bit further of like why these signs might be showing up. I think like you said, like the swelling and edema and congestion can kind of like make sense, right? If we're talking about fluid, well, like swelling, there's excess fluid going on and it's accumulating, it's not draining well. Like it kind of feels like an obvious connection. But thinking about, even something like fatigue and brain fog, kind of breaking that down a little bit more, again, we're coming back to the channels, right? And if the channels are being clogged or weighed down, it's going to prevent whatever's made to move through that channel of getting to where it needs to go, right? And especially if we're thinking about where the lymph nodes are in the body, right? They're at those junctions, right? And at those like points of accumulation. Well, the nodes are really important because that's where the detoxification actually happens. So you can get this fluid moving, but if it's congested at the lymph nodes, that's where you want to get moving first because that's clogged, right? And you want to like clear that drainage. So if we're thinking about where those lymph nodes are, if we're thinking about the collarbone and the neck and the head area, if they're clogged, then you can't get nutrients or oxygen or blood to the brain area, right? And that's going to create a fogginess because there's going to be more toxins. There's going to be more harmful things there than more helpful things. It becomes harder for things to pass through that channel to get to that system for it to function. And the same with the lower part of the body where we have these other junctions at the pelvic area. We're talking about the upper thigh area, the inner thigh area. the hips, the lower back, the abdomen. There's a lot going on in there to begin with, right? We have our intestines and our uterus and our bladder and a whole bunch of organs with their own functions. And then we have these lymph nodes as well. And if those lymph nodes are staying clogged and maybe swelling, then any of those channels are just going to compile and get larger as opposed to having things clear out. So if we think about skin imbalances related to the lymph system, part of the blood is cleaned through the lymph system. If there's accumulation in the blood vessel, it can move into the lymph, and then the lymph cleans it and moves it back into the bloodstream, and then it goes through the rest of the processes to move out and be cleared by the body. If the blood has toxins in it and then the lymph is clogged, it's not going to clean that blood very well. So then whatever's going back into the bloodstream after the lymph has tried to clean it, it's just going to still be built up with toxins that have been toxic in the lymphatic system. So it's not going to get cleaned very well. So when that blood tissue has an accumulation of toxins and bacteria that aren't getting cleaned because the lymphatic system is clogged, that can show up as those skin imbalances, as acne, as rashes, as irritations. And I think that's an important distinction too. Like whenever we're seeing those types of imbalances and maybe you're having PMS, you're having that other type of congestion, or you're having constipation or that brain fog, like those other symptoms, then we're definitely looking at lymph and stagnation in the body and wanting to help clear and clean. So an important connection there with the blood in that sense and where we can look for signs of imbalance. Because I think it's important what you said. I think you said this offline before we started recording that like the lymphatic system isn't as tangible as like the circulatory system. Because I think we can even see the circulatory system, right? Like we can see our veins, we can see things happening on our body. We can feel it, right? We can feel our heart beating. So we can have this kind of direct connection to something like the circulatory system, but the lymph system, we can't see our lymph nodes necessarily, right? Unless there's an imbalance and you're having these symptoms. But in general, it is a little bit more of an ethereal anatomy piece. So I think that can be just an important call out in why it's something that, I guess, one, not talked about as much in Western medicine, but also that maybe takes a little bit more to understand it because we can't physically see it.
Yeah, and we can't measure it, right? It's not that we don't understand it in the Western medicine. Like they understand in very extensive detail how it works and all of these functions. And it's, again, very in accordance to translating what the Ayurvedic text said thousands of years ago. But the reason it's not more of a mainstream part of and it's, again, very in accordance to translating what the Ayurvedic text said thousands of years ago. But the reason it's not more of a mainstream part of healthcare in Western medicine, and particularly a part of preventative health in any way, is because it's not measurable, like, say, the blood. You can go and get blood work done, and so much of medicine is based around that. It doesn't work that way with the lymph. And, not to get cynical, but when you can't measure something, you can't monetize something. So it doesn't drive incentive to do more work in that area, just in the capitalistic systems we live within. So, it's not a general conversation in healthcare, but I'd also think, to your point, it's like a little bit more of an elusive part of the body. And that's why I like to bring in these metaphors of like the rivers of your body, right? Or it's the plumbing system of your body. And we can think of it in these different analogies, because I do think it's also a system that does so much and is so interconnected with so many other systems. And that was actually one thing I wanted to bring up when you were talking about the brain fog piece, is the connection between our lymphatic system and sleep. And so when we are getting good quality sleep, we also have these rivers, if you will, these rivers of fluid that run through our brain. And actually, this is something, I looked this up recently. It was just in 2012 that modern science kind of coined and labeled this. They called the lymphatic system, which is the lymph of the brain. And essentially, again, reinforcing what we've known in the Ayurvedic text for thousands of years is that when we get deep sleep, these channels of fluid in the brain, this cerebral spinal fluid, quite literally washes the brain. It washes plaques out of our brain. And so it's a really, really important aspect of having that healthy lymph is having good quality sleep and how interconnected those two are in order to remove plaques from our brain that otherwise can increase our chances of developing things like dementia and Alzheimer's and things of that nature. I think one practice that I really love for countless reasons is doing a head massage before sleep, and that can support that lymphatic flow and that literal washing of the brain that's happening. And there is some modern research to support that, but it's an Ayurvedic practice that has been around for thousands of years that I do think we have a video on in the wellness library is a Marma point head massage before bed and can support better sleep. And then again, that sleep is going to support our long-term cognitive functioning.
Yeah. Yeah, I've I've done that head massage and it is amazing. It's really helpful. And yeah, and that's such a great point. There's also facial cupping is very common. And I have a video on that in the wellness library as well. But it's most recommended to do that before bed, right? Because you're allowing that lymph to start flowing at this time of detoxification that's naturally happening in the body. And so I think specifically with the brain and the head area, that is a great way to support that natural detoxification is by doing that head massage or the facial cupping or just if all you have are your hands, right? You can do that. Like you don't need a special gadget to do it, but yeah, just kind of get things going and start massaging and kind of hit those major points where the lymph nodes are before bed can stimulate that. You kind of get things going in motion, moving in the right direction for that detoxification that's so important during sleep.
Yeah, and I like how you brought it back to just the simple power of our own two hands because the other Ayurvedic practice that is really powerful for lymph that I know you and I both love to try to get into every episode if possible is Abhyanga, which is a warm herbal oil massage that we would perform on the body. And that is a technique that's often done either first thing in the morning or sometimes before bed and can just really support the circulation and blood flow, but also that lymph flow. And we can do that massage with oil, like we just described. You can also do what's known as Garshana or more of a friction massage, which could be more dry brushing or even using silk gloves. That's what's a little bit more traditional Ayurvedically. And we've talked about that in episode 5 on tips for kapha season a little bit. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on either of those with lymph or any other practices that come to mind?
Well, I guess I'm just laughing because, yeah, Abhyanga is something that I started doing without even realizing it was also supporting my lymphatic system. Like it just was, I started practicing Abhyanga for anxiety. And it has an endless list of benefits for emotional health, physical health, spiritual health. Like the list goes on. And I'm still kind of exploring what it can offer in so many different situations. But I love that because it is a practice that, yeah, you're putting oil on your body, but you're also supporting your lymph system without even, having to like, I don't know, it just feels so simple in a way. It's
Mm.
like put some oil on your body and like get things moving and flowing and you're, hydrating your skin and you're strengthening your muscles and your bones and you're supporting your nervous tissue and you're getting things moving. And I know when I've done an Abhyanga at home and like really wanted to like get things moving, if I do it a little bit more vigorously, I can
Mhm.
feel my insides moving. Like I can feel tingly. The fluids are moving, juices are moving in the body. And it feels so powerful to know, like, okay, a little bit of oil and my two hands. And like you can really have a very profound experience from something really simple. I think the biggest thing with lymph and supporting lymph is that movement, right? So, however you're getting that movement, even putting your legs up the wall is a common one.
Mm.
But the reason that helps the lymph is because, like you said, lymph doesn't have that pump. So any inversion is going to drain that lymph back towards the heart, which is what we're going for, right? Because the heart is what then will drain it into the bloodstream. So anything that's draining it back towards the heart is going to be helpful. So you don't have to overcomplicate it. It can be really simple. Move your arms around, twist your body. And yeah, we did give some really helpful tips in episode 5 about kapha season, because again, we're talking about this lymph tissue is very kapha type tissue, right? So we're supporting that movement and that stimulation.
Yeah, and the other one that's worth mentioning is hydration and the importance of hydrating to support our lymph. But what I have found is it's really more important to look at the frequency of hydration as compared to overall quantity. I mean, overall quantity, of course, is going to play a role as well. But if you are taking just pretty frequent small sips throughout the day, then that is supporting our lymphatic movement as well. And with that, I think we could even talk specifically about like herbs and teas and specific ways to boost our lymph flow even more. But that I think is another one just I wanted to mention.
Yeah, and that's important too, thinking about kind of the opposite direction
Mm.
or the opposite extreme, if you will, where if you're not hydrated enough, if you're not getting enough of that hydration, you're kind of depleting the lymphatic system. So you're kind of like drying it out, right? Where we want it to be fluid and moving. And when it's not, that prevents those white blood cells from doing their job and protecting you and having that immunity. And that's another sign that we didn't talk about as a symptom is someone that's maybe always getting sick or constantly getting sick. The germs are sticking around, bacterias are sticking around, and the lymph system is not like the white blood cells are not getting to where they need to go to fight off those bacterias or those germs or whatever it is that's gotten in. So that can be a sign of that. But we want to make sure that the river is flowing. And if the river's dried up, then those white blood cells are also not getting to where they need to go.
Yeah, and I think to keep the rivers flowing, I like saying it that way, we can look in terms of certain herbs that can support that further. And this is always individualized, but I think even if you think of certain herbs that just create movement in the body, like ginger, for example, ginger is a really good one for circulation and also supporting that lymph flow as well. And one of my favorite herbs is brahmi, which has been shown to support the lymph channels specifically in the brain, and that we can support that extra fluid flowing through and the washing of the brain and lots of different ways that Brahmi supports cognition and brain health. But I think, again, bringing in herbs that are specific to symptoms and specific to constitutions is something we're always doing in Ayurvedic medicine, both culinary and in teas and formulas and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of different ways to support with herbs. And I do love the simplicity of ginger. It's so accessible and affordable and like, easy to get your hands on, that if you're unsure where to start, like start with ginger and see how it feels. And tulsi and turmeric are also two other herbs that are tulsi's warming, and that's helpful in, I think you said in one of our previous episodes, right? If it's warm, it's going to open the channel and that can help keep things moving in the body. And tulsi is also very supportive for moving prana, right? So we're supporting that breathing, that oxygenation piece as well, and that clarity of mind. So tulsi is a really nice one that most people can probably find at like their local tea shop. And turmeric, right? We think about turmeric as being a blood supporter, and so we know if we're supporting the blood, it is interwoven with the lymphatic system, and that is also a mover, which is helpful. So yeah, and then foods too, right? There's always foods that can be supportive for different functions in the body. And going back to, the prana piece, like having fresh pranic foods, right? And pranic being foods that are locally sourced, right? They haven't had a lot of transport, because each day, if you think about when something's picked and harvested from the ground and then it has to spend 5 days on a truck getting to you, it loses a lot of prana, it loses a lot of nutrients in that transportation. So having food that's locally sourced, as best you can. Like, that's going to be a very high prana food as opposed to something that's been traveling for a few days before it gets to your plate. But that prana brings in that oxygenation, right? There's more vibrancy, there's more life, there's more aliveness in that food, and that is going to help keep things moving in the body, and obviously support lymph, like we've been talking about. And another aspect, we're thinking about anti-inflammation too, and that's a big piece of supporting lymph flow, because if things become inflamed, then that can also create blockages in the channels and create things from flowing. So, we look at bitters, we look at leafy greens, things that are astringent, things that are pulling energy down and out. Um, Berries are very high in antioxidant. Those are anti-inflammatory. Those are helpful. Citrus is helpful. If we think about citrus, it kind of has this like vibrancy to it, and I think that vibrancy can get things moving is kind of a simple way to think about it. But also there's more research that we won't go into the rabbit hole of this today, but there's more research on nitric oxide being supportive for the lymphatic system and supporting lymphatic tissue and fluid and movement. So anything with citrus is going to have that nitric oxide. And also beets are really helpful too. We know that beets are really helpful for the blood and for oxygenation. And the way I think about it is that if you're having high prana foods, you're going to have that extra oxygen, and that oxygen is going to help things move. And then you also want to have anything that is creating movement, like bitters, like leafy greens, things that are similar to the herbs we talked about. They're like creating a stimulation in the body.
Yeah, and I think what we're really trying to bring across in this episode is these simple practices of moving, hydrating, massaging, herbs, food, breathing, and not just looking at lymph as something to tend to only if we need to. And I think that's a lot of what we've been taught in the Western medicine lens, is that lymph is really primarily addressed only if we're experiencing things like lymphedema, which is a swelling of fluid that can happen when there's a disruption in the lymphatic system. And it can be really common after surgery or a situation where some lymph nodes have been removed, or infection can cause that. There's lots of different factors, but it's not something that we want to only think about lymph in terms of when there's an impairment of lymph. We really want to be doing all that we can to just support our body in these really simple things that can become pretty routine and just become a part of our lives.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And not waiting, right? This is where the preventative medicine piece comes in. We're not waiting to see an imbalance. We're not waiting to have swelling or weight gain or have brain fog. Like, we are being proactive about maintaining that longevity. And that's where Ayurveda really shines as a preventative care system, where we are getting ahead of letting disease develop through these practices.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Just supporting our rivers, right? Supporting this flow of life throughout the body. And that's what Ayurveda offers, is endless ways to connect with ourselves and to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We are nature. It's like, look at the rivers near you and see what it's doing, right? Like, what happens when it's flowing? What happens when it's overflowing or when it's dry, right? And you can think about, how is that showing up
Mm.
in your body too? If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world to us and help support our work if you'd like, share, leave a review, as well as subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you use. If you're looking for more connection or would like to support this podcast, we'd love to have you join our Patreon for $5 a month. Here you'll get bonus episodes and access to our community chat Q&A.
And don't forget to check out our wellness library, which is filled with self-guided classes, kitchen tutorials, herbal recipes, and more Ayurvedic practices, all for just $5 a month. Thanks so much for being here with us. Until next time, be well.